This is going to be, as we get the PowerPoint going, this is an overview of where we are with Policy Action 2025. Who here in the room has been a part of Policy Action 2023 and or Policy Action 2025? Awesome. There's a good chunk of people here, and we have about, I think there's 5 of us that are going to be presenting quick updates. We are going to move quickly. We also have a QR code that we're going to put up around, like, I think we've got 10 copies of paper that have the QR code that will lead you to a piece of paper, in the virtual world with links to a lot of what we're talking about, because that just seems the best way to move it. So I also want to start by giving a shout out to GrowSmart Maine board members and staff. We have at least 6 or 7 people here from GrowSmart in supporting the great work that's happening here. So we're going to dive in with a little bit about Policy Action 2025. This is a crowdsourcing of advocacy. If any of you know Zoe Miller, if you know her or not, that's her testifying in front of the Transportation Committee last year. The major steps began at Build Maine. These Build Maine meetings have been a major part of getting policy from the ground up to Augusta. And with Policy Action 2025, we're building on Policy Action 2023. This time we had 7 working groups advancing 16 new bills and tracking a report that came out of the prior session. We have 4 goals. One is to pass good legislation. Secondly is to increase advocacy capacity within the folks who are working with us. For some, it's the first time they've ever done lobbying. For others, it's a way to connect with the other lobbying that they do throughout the year. And also to build the coalition relationships. One of the strengths and challenges of smart growth is it crosses through all the sectors, where we have developers, we have conservation organizations, we have community leaders, and all of those come together and oftentimes hadn't known each other before they started working on advocacy. Those broad perspectives are powerful in this work. And then finally, we host difficult but important conversations. Even though we're pretty sure the bill isn't going to pass, we need to have these conversations, and you'll hear about some of this now. I also want to mention, if this excites you, go to fastdemocracy.com. You can get a free account and track bills or issues of interest to you. This is at the congressional level and the state level. You can also follow some of our bills so that you can keep up to date more quickly than waiting for us to give announcements, because it happens that quickly. What we're going to do today, stay on this one, thank you. What we're going to do today is give you a quick update. What's the score? What's happened this time? What is still in play this session? There's still about 2 weeks to go. And how can you engage? I'm excited to say a lot of the challenges that you've heard this morning. I'm sitting in the back going, we got a bill for that. They need to get across the finish line, and they need to get funded. This afternoon, if this interests you, and if you're signed up for the Lunch and Learn, which I hear is at capacity, we're going to focus on what's next, what to do with bills that are not moving forward this year and carried over, or start looking at the next legislature. Go ahead. All right. Now we're going to dive into the bills, and the first one up, Josh Caldwell and RCM is going to talk about a bill he worked on this year.
Thanks so much, Nancy, and hi all. How are we doing? Fantastic. I'm here to talk to you all today about iterative incremental progress on making transit better in Maine, which is a really exciting thing and really has happened because of the GrowSmart policy action process. So back in 2023, we got a group together to talk about how are we going to improve transit across the state of Maine, with a primary focus on increasing funding, which is what we were hearing over and over again as a primary obstacle. It turned out that at that time, what that group came to was we need a better process for putting forward perpetual recommendations to the Maine Department of Transportation and other stakeholders so that we can make informed decisions about how to invest in public transit. So what we did, actually let me ask first, who has heard of the Public Transit Advisory Council? A couple. I'm here to change that. The Public Transit Advisory Council is a phenomenal body of about 30 folks from around the state who get together every year to produce a report about how to improve transit in Maine. Prior to 2023, that group was meeting on average once a year and sometimes not at all, and a report was produced that didn't get a lot of attention. What we recognized we needed to do was make that committee more robust, establish a chair who could call meetings so that that committee could meet more regularly, 6 times a year rather than once a year, and produce a report that had some real teeth to it that identified the primary problems impacting public transit in the state of Maine. So I am now the vice chair of the Public Transit Advisory Council via that process, which has been really exciting, and I've been helping to convene conversations with transit operators, transit riders, and other stakeholders across the state of Maine to understand where the real obstacles are to effective public transit in the state. This bill emerged as an opportunity to implement the recommendations that came out of the Public Transit Advisory Council. So in 2023, we beefed up the Public Transit Advisory Council, we established a chair outside of the council who could call meetings more regularly, and now we're passing a bill that just passed unanimously out of the Transportation Committee to implement the recommendations that emerge from that committee. So you can see how we're building on the work that we've been doing over the past several years to bring better public transit to the state of Maine. We'll learn at the end of this year, Maine DOT will provide some feedback to us as to how they've implemented our top recommendations, which primarily circle around increasing funding, increasing transparency in distribution, and increasing coordination of rides around the state between the folks that offer rides for communities. So I'll stop there. I'd be happy to talk to folks more about public transit, but we can consider this a win. It did pass out of the committee unanimously, so all the Transportation Committee members recognize that we need to implement the recommendations of the Public Transit Advisory Council. It does have one final hurdle, which is a small fiscal note. We don't think that's going to get in the way of its final passage, and we look forward next session to continuing to build on our progress towards improving public transit statewide. Yeah. Thanks. Nancy was just reminding me that I wrote an observation on the slide that I should share with all of you, which is that legislation is much stronger when it is backed by collective experience. Whether that's a coalition setting or in our case, a more formalized group of folks with expertise that could come together and actually put forward a recommendation to our citizen legislatures that otherwise don't necessarily have expertise in every field. It's much more effective when you're able to produce something with a collective body like the Public Transit Advisory Council. So starting with that coalition base and then moving legislation is a really effective model. All right, actually, thank you all.
Hi, folks. My name is Myles Smith. I'm a consultant and policy advocate, and I'm going to tell you a story that's going to look like failure, but it's failure born of so many successes that one more success was not quite possible. So if many of you said that you were volunteers in Policy Action 2023, I was as well. I grew up in Maine, and then 22 years later, after living overseas and out of state, came back home and got involved in advocacy with Nancy's organization and had such a great time that I was on one call and heard about this proposal, which had apparently been in the works for 30 years, to build a highway connecting the Maine Mall to Gorham, called the Gorham Connector. Who's heard of the Gorham Connector? Oh, look at that. Everybody's heard of it in this room. And we were on this call, and we heard that they had a plan, they had a route, they were going to go to permitting, they were ready, the Maine Turnpike Authority, to submit this project and build it. And we thought this was ridiculous, and I said, well, I'll organize a call and see who shows up. And like 70 people showed up to the first call, and then we had a press conference, and every major news outlet in the state showed up, and then we went to the only public presentation of this project in Gorham in March of 2024, and 330 people showed up and talked for 5 hours about what a stupid idea this was. And the Turnpike Authority, about 1 year later, in March of this year, said that they weren't going to do it. That one project was going to cost $330 million to build. The 30-year asset model, if Jim were here, he'd be very proud of us because we came up with a 30-year asset model for the building, operation, maintenance, and reconstruction of that 1 5-mile highway. It was going to cost the people of Maine and our tourist industry almost $1 billion over 30 years. And we know that that's not very smart. So we have an organization called Mainers for Smarter Transportation. It's an initiative of GrowSmart, Maine, trying to get smarter transportation solutions for our state. And through that organization, we worked with Senator Nancy Brenner on 2 bills, one to codify the repeal and cancellation of that project, which did not pass. We have a little bit more work to do to kill what we are now calling a zombie project. If I were more prepared, I would have had a picture of like a Walking Dead zombie or something over here to represent what is now the Gorham Connector. We also had a second bill, which was to take the savings from the Maine Turnpike Authority, which has a profit margin of about $50 to $70 million per year, and invest that in all of our other many transportation needs. That also did not pass, but we're hoping to bring back this idea in the future. We also had a bill that would have required us to have a smart selection process for our projects, where we understand what are our transportation priorities. They are transparently published, then they are scored, and they are selected on a merit basis. That also did not pass. But we have other ideas about how to make that better. And our observation from working with the Transportation Committee on these bills is that they are intensely lobbied by the road construction industry, and it's going to require a lot more people than those of us in this room to get big things done there, to make big changes. There was a lot more interest among legislators off of the committee than on the committee in the stuff that we were talking about. So there is a base for progress in the future. But right now I want to thank the many people in this room who were involved in stopping the Gorham Connector to this point. Please raise your hands if you took some action to do something about the Gorham Connector. Thank you to all of you who made the biggest win in transportation in Maine possible last year.
Thank you. Celebrating wins is fun, but do note he called it a zombie project. They aren't going to do it now. They should study it some more. So we will continue with the next step, the growth management law. This, you heard earlier, one of the presenters talked about policies are as important as zoning and ordinances. And the growth management law, which is where comprehensive plans come from, that gives legal standing for any zoning ordinances that a community would care to move forward with. This has been in the works for several years. I'm going to say that it started with a slumber party and just leave that at that for now, but also that this is one of 2 bills that went through the legislature this session. This is the one that has the majority ought to pass report and that we have been working to support. It updates definitions and state goals. It offers 2 choices to communities. They can continue with the current process of comp planning with some improvements and streamlining to the process, or they can use the place types as a way to ground discussions in current human activity and to have an initial focus on identifying rural areas where they don't want development. There will be debate on the House and the Senate floor, and your voice would be very valuable in this. As you can see, it's a divided report, 7+1. 7 members of the committee voted in support of it as amended. 1 committee member has their own amendment report in support, and then 5 ONTP is ought not to pass. So the final language is being updated, and it'll be out soon. My observations are that I love, this is, remember earlier I said smart growth is where developers and conservation and communities all come together. This bill is both an environmental priorities coalition bill, and Marita is supporting it. And it's been very important as we work through this to hear all of the voices impacted by comprehensive planning. And when you've got developers and the conservation community supporting a bill, that matters. My other takeaway, and save this one for later, is that options are better than mandates when we do public policy. All right, next up we have Joe, who's going to present because Ches with Maine Audubon is in Augusta lobbying today and couldn't make it, so.
Hi everybody, that's right. I am not Ches Gundrum. I'm Joe Oliva. I work with GrowSmart Maine, and I'm here as a surrogate for Ches, who's written a few thoughts that I'll give to y'all. Modernizing Maine's subdivision laws was a hot topic in this legislative session, and several bills called for raising the thresholds for triggering subdivision laws. So clearly I'm no expert, she definitely is. Meaning more lots could be created from one parcel without triggering additional regulation. Some were carried over and some were killed. Notably, LD 161, which is the bill that we worked on, which would convene a stakeholder group, was carried over. And the whole kind of point and purpose to this bill was to look at the slate of subdivision law and modernize it, update it, make it suitable for changing Maine, and especially in terms of addressing the housing crisis. This bill was also, or rather, the kind of subdivision topic was taken up by LD 1829, which is Speaker Fecto's omnibus bill, that originally proposed to allow for 5 lots from a parcel before triggering subdivision law. But this was removed from the bill, which now only loosens subdivision rule for up to 5 dwelling units within an existing structure. And we support this change wholeheartedly. On to the next.
And to be clear, if it wasn't clear, we support making it easier to do subdivisions within structures, not parcels. I heard a boo, and I wasn't sure what that was directed at. So Tara Kelly was not able to make it today. She has been an incredible lead on the historic rehab tax credit. She's the head of Maine Preservation. So you can see the bill number and the title. What this bill has done is it expands Maine's historic rehab tax credit to include non-commercial, read residential properties, to include weatherization costs in the allowable costs for the credit, and it ends the sunset provision, which has been a part of the historic rehab tax credit for decades, meaning that every 2 to 4 years we need to come and make the pitch again. This bill passed in the legislature last year and died on the appropriations table. The status, as you can see now, is a strong divided report, 10 in favor and 2 ought not to pass, and we're tracking it as it moves forward. Thank you. And I guess I'll mention, too, this is one of 3 historic rehab tax credit bills that went through the legislature this year. It's been a big year for historic preservation tax credit. Next up.
Hi, everyone. That's me. I'm Sam Purinton, and I led the working group to try to use the tax structure to incentivize the kind of development that we're looking for. So before I get started, how many people here are familiar with the concept of a land value tax? Okay, so that looks like 10%. How many people have at least heard of the land value tax? Okay, about the same. So the land value tax, very quickly, very briefly, is a policy idea where you take a property tax, and on a property tax, the value of the building and the value of the land is taxed at the same rate. And a land value tax says, we're not going to tax the value of the building or other improvements, we're just going to tax the value of the land. And this is a policy that's been tried in Pennsylvania with a lot of success in places like Pittsburgh and Allentown and Harrisburg. And so I wanted to try to bring it to Maine, but there is a question about constitutional clarity because Maine has a equity clause in the Constitution around taxation. And so we submitted this bill, LD 1464, as a way to hopefully clarify whether or not towns have the ability to do this policy. As you can see, it died in the committee, but it got rolled into another bill, which is going to create a tax force to address property taxes in Maine generally, because as one of the observations, it's not there, but one of the observations from testifying for this bill is that property tax is a really big issue in Maine right now. There were like at least 5 other bills that were trying to find innovative ways to increase funds without burdening people who couldn't make up that difference. So it's gotten rolled into LD 1770, which looks like it's going to pass. And one of the biggest observations I had, which is kind of similar to this room, is that the land value tax is a totally novel idea in Augusta. So for those of you in this room who are familiar with the land value tax, who appreciate its value, I think it's very worthwhile that as you talk to people in this space, as you talk to people in other policymaking space, that you talk to them about the land value tax, tell them why it's something we should be trying or doing, and maybe next time we go to Augusta, we won't have to work so hard to educate everybody because they'll already come in with some understanding of what the policy idea is.
Hi, there's a bunch of bills here. My name is Liz Trice, and I work with both Backyard ADUs and Maine Cooperative Development Partners. And what I'm going to talk about here is sprinklers. So this was the first time I had organized around a bill. And the idea is I had heard with the people I work with that sprinklers can add $30,000 to the cost of a housing unit, and other problems, which, if you're trying to build an ADU for $200,000 or $300,000, that's a lot of money, and it's just one more, straw breaking the camel's back and not getting things built. So I think the story I want to tell is that I did not know much about sprinklers. I did not know much about Augusta. I wanted to help, and so I said, well, I'll hold a meeting for everyone who's interested, and I emailed everybody on the group 6 and said, let's talk about this. And then what was really cool is somebody who came to that meeting texted somebody else who actually had been tracking every fatal fire death in Maine for the last 20 years and showed up at the meeting and brought all of this incredible data on the fly. It was amazing. And so then we organized that data. I helped him organize it. We made it into a presentable form. We gave it to the committee. We showed up. We testified. And there were 25 fire chiefs in the room. And the fire chiefs were saying, sprinklers, save all the lives, and it only costs $1 per square foot. And then we had all the builders in the room saying, well, actually, we have this data that shows that all the fatal fire deaths in Maine, for which we have data, shows that they were all houses built before 1980 without smoke detectors. And, oh, by the way, here's all of our recent projects that we've built, and it's costing $15, $16, $17 a square foot. And the committee was like, who do we believe? What do we do? There's 25 guys, in uniforms over there. So they asked for more data, and we sent them more data, and they voted not to pass. But there's another bill that has, it doesn't matter, but there's another bill that has sprinklers in it saying that they're banning it just for ADUs. And I will say in Maine, there's only about 6 or 8 municipalities in the whole state that require sprinklers for 1 and 2 unit buildings. And one of them, Rockland, and Adam Lockman is here somewhere, the city councilor, just voted to remove it. It's really easy. So part of me is why not just go after those 6 towns instead of having a whole bunch of people going like this talking about home rule, So that's my observation. And I'm also thinking another year it'd be great to be involved, I don't know, a year or 2 ahead of time and be like, do any of you know fire chiefs? Can we actually have a conversation about this? Or is it we're going to go to the grave saying this data that may not be true? I don't know how to handle that.
That's what the afternoon session's for.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll hit on another couple of bills that came out of this working group that you've heard referenced earlier today. The first one is preparation of pre-approved building types. This bill passed in the House and Senate, but was not funded with a $300,000 fiscal note last year. This year it is sitting on the appropriations table with a $200,000 fiscal note. I believe it's one of roughly, I think, 100 bills with $100 million worth of asks. So there's a lot of work to get this over the finish line again. LD 1247, what we call Ed's bill, comes from Ed Libby, and it deals with a lot of the challenges that we see in infill in growth areas, addressing setbacks, frontage, and lot size requirements. That's been carried over to next year. However, as well as what Liz mentioned for sprinklers, parts of it were put into LD 1829, which I'll reference a little bit later on. So again, pieces of it are moving forward in different ways within a different bill. We do have a success to talk about with the bottom one on the list. LD 427 began, I believe we spoke of parking earlier this morning. It began as a bill that would ban parking requirements for housing developments. What it has come out to be is, as amended, it would eliminate parking requirements within a quarter mile of transit use stops, fixed use transit stops. It limits to 1 space per unit in growth areas, and it legalizes shared parking arrangements as a means to meet the parking minimums statewide. So that came out of committee with 9 in support and 3 in opposition. We'll need some attention to that as it goes through the House and Senate as well. I want to mention we track bills that go beyond the ones that came from Policy Action 2025 and reference another thing we heard today, impact fees. There is a Bill 1246 that started as a bill to eliminate the municipality's ability to put impact fees in. What it came out as is a stakeholder group to look at, to have MOCA, the Maine Office of Community Affairs, look at impact fees and what makes sense. That has passed in the House and is currently going back and forth. So I think it's heartening, as we heard the challenges this morning, that Policy Action 2025, this crowdsourcing, is addressing a lot of those concerns. All right, we have, I think, just 2 other summaries of bills as we move forward. There was a working group that we called Government Coordination. And you can see, if you can see at the top, there's a bill that passed last year that required the Governor's Office on Policy, Innovation, and the Future to report to the Housing and Economic Development Committee on what can be happening for better coordination of state-level agencies in service to communities. Maine DOT has a section in there where they talked about their Village Partnership Initiative, the speed setting in village areas, and complete streets. And some of those we advanced in Policy Action 2023 as well. That report is there, and I think, again, fodder for this afternoon when we talk about what needs to be brought forward again. And then LD 1632 is something that Kara brought forward, died in committee, but the idea we can all recognize, the rural state highways with strip malls and highway cuts that become nowhere land of, it's not rural, it's not open space, but it certainly isn't viable commercial area, and it's not what we're looking for in Maine. So that one died. We think part of the challenge might be getting it to the right committee. That if that had gone to Housing and Economic Development, they may have had a better understanding of it than Transportation, which is part of the reason maybe this afternoon we talk about those connections and how to move advocacy forward, because to be efficient, the legislature works within its silos of its policies to get started. My observation on this one is that significant policy change can take a long time. Like I said, these are 4 and 5 years in the work, and we're still moving forward. Advance the slide. Oh, so the observation I had for the last one, this is advice I got from a lobbyist early in the time when I was a legislator. The first thing he said was always take credit for the inevitable because you will get blamed when things go wrong. But the other thing that he said is you can get a lot done if you don't care who gets credit. And we've talked about LD 829, which is the Speaker's bill. The policies we care about didn't advance in our bills, but they are advancing in this form with a unanimous committee report. And because it's the Speaker's bill, it will have clout as it moves forward. Here are the things that it requires. Planning board members need to receive some level of training about land use policy. Municipalities cannot require owner occupation as part of building an ADU. Municipalities cannot require sprinklers in ADUs that are freestanding or within single-family or duplexes. Municipalities cannot put growth caps on growth areas. You're allowed a bonus story if you're doing affordable housing. I think that's within growth areas as well. It requires increased density in growth areas, and there are 3 different tiers to this that were too complicated to put on the slide, but when the bill language is out and printed, we can share that. It raises we've already talked about this. It raises the threshold for subdivision for structures from 3 to 5, but leaves it at 3 for land parcel. Go back to LD 161, the stakeholder group that will look at subdivision for land. Clearly improvements need to be made, but it's going to take a thoughtful approach. What I love too to comment on is that the speaker withdrew the portion of the bill that had to do with parking requirements because he recognized the committee had already passed a bill that we've discussed earlier today. He also took out reference to a state-level appeals board or state-level resolutions board because that is going to be contentious. But the House Chair, Tracy Geer, has a bill that's been carried over to next year that addresses that as well. I think we can advance. So, we framed this conversation as a bit of what's happening now and what's next. And I'm going to start with what's next. And this is, I think, the fodder for our afternoon conversations. Bills that are carried over, meaning that the committees aren't going to work on them this year, they're going to work on them next year. Subdivision Stakeholder Working Group, limiting zoning and ordinances that municipalities can do, the statewide resolutions, state-level resolutions board, and then another complicated policy issue about the intersections of road construction and land use. Bills that were voted ought not to pass in committee or have made it all the way through the legislature and they're officially dead, but that is their future. These are policies that we may want to discuss again, like why did they die? Are they worth bringing up in the future? They're ones that we've discussed here. As we wrap up, if you can go to the last one. Cool. I want to end with what's happening now so that we can leave this slide up for a little bit with the QR code that is labeled how to contact your legislators. How many of you have a first name basis relationship with your state rep and or your state senator? Do they know who you are? That is awesome to see. There's about 20% of the crowd raise their hands. These are bills that are in play in the next 2 weeks. That's about when we think the legislature is going to adjourn. It's actually a little less than that. We've talked about, Josh talked about LD 1359 is the transit recommendations. It's sitting on the transportation appropriations table waiting to get funded. 546 is the pre-approved building designs, and within the bill, it's supposed to meet certain income levels, affordability, when they have those. And 1770 is the bill that Sam mentioned, where they're looking at very broad issues on property taxes, and we'll be bringing up that the land value tax, which was relevant to the empty parking lot conversations we had earlier. Bills that have divided reports or that are going to be debated in the House and Senate. If you are interested, again, we'll have QR codes where you can go look at this more. Contact your legislator and ask them to support these bills. 1940, again, had the 7+1 out of committee support. That's the growth management law. 435 is the historic rehab tax credit. That came out of the committee with 10 in support. 427 is parking, 9 in support. And then I make note, the ones on the bottom came out of the Transportation Committee where we got 3 people in support and 1 people in support. If you have limited time, maybe don't devote your time there because of the likelihood of success, but they are there. And then again, 1829 is the Speaker's bill, which does that great checklist of things that we saw that was unanimous out of committee. So our call to action to you is to learn more if you're interested and contact your legislators. Ideally, you've got a relationship with them already. If you don't, The Maine legislature is pretty awesome, that they are approachable, they're in your neighborhood, and this is part of their role, is to hear from you all. And that the QR code will help you if you don't have phone numbers or emails for them. I think at that point we can open it up for questions broadly, and thank you for your attention. Thank you for your interest in what happens in Augusta. We hope that through this work we make the good stuff at the municipal level possible as we move forward on these issues. So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Do we have any questions?
What should somebody do if they have an idea for state policy?
If you have an idea for state policy we haven't talked about yet, there is the lunch and learn this afternoon, or reach out to us through all of the contact information we have here. It's not too soon to be thinking about next year, which is the second year of session, or Policy Action 2027.
Hold on.
With regards to some of the conversation and outcomes, or maybe lack of outcomes regarding issues associated with the Gorham connector, who is the road association, the road builders association that was hinted at? Name names.
Name names. So it's interesting. The Associated General Contractors, AGC, the Contractors Lobby, and the Maine Better Transportation Association, which is a membership association, although the biggest members of the association are the Maine DOT in some form, and the Maine Turnpike Authority, and the Associated General Contractors, and then all the other contractors in the state. They were working with and agreeing with the Department of Transportation on many of the bills. And my reflection would be that they were more influential than we were as the advocacy community, and over time we need to change that. So thanks for your question.
Any other questions? Oh, hold on.
LD 1829, the original language, as far as I was aware, on the increased density, didn't seem to actually limit it to growth area. It said where there's public water and sewer or a comparable subsurface wastewater system, which could be septic. So I'm just curious if we know if that was changed or not.
Yes, it changed, and GrowSmart and others, including Maine Audubon, were very active in pushing back against the original version of 1829. I'm trying to remember if the email I got this morning has the version of the amended language. We'll get it up on our website and share it as soon as we can. A lot of the advocacy that we've done in defense has been to address the fact that some bills are based on more housing everywhere, and that's not sustainable for all the reasons that you all know because you're here and our presenters this morning reaffirmed. And what came out in 1829 is a level of density that municipalities have to require, first, within growth areas that have suitable or adequate water and sewer. Then growth areas that don't have water and sewer is a little bit lighter threshold for density. And then I think the other is, I don't remember what the third one is, very complicated language, but it took it away from allowing more density everywhere. That's not our goal in the work that we're doing. There's a lot of things that changed in that bill in response to testimony from us and others. It's the value of public hearings and showing up, and a committee that's really paying attention and wants to make it work, and a sponsor who is open to what do we need to do to get this move forward.
Okay, so I'm not that familiar with the Growth Management Act, but my understanding is that it requires municipalities to designate growth areas within their own town. Is that correct?
I'm going to look at some other folks to verify. Number one, comprehensive plans are voluntary. And number two, no, I do have this, because it's gone through gyrations. There are exemptions. There are about 4 different bullets. If you have any of those criteria, then you are not required to have a to have a designated growth area.
Okay, what opportunities are there for mechanisms to look more like regionally at growth? Because I live in Portland, and when you look at the zoning code for Portland, South Portland, they're absorbing not, or more than their fair share compared to our, whatever.
So there's also mechanisms and I think incentives within the bill to encourage regional approaches. And that has been true for the growth management law currently, that, particularly when we're looking at rural towns that don't have capacity in the town, they can either contract for that capacity through private consultants or regional planning organizations. And ideally, they will work with several towns in the surrounding area. It's incredibly powerful to do that, as you know, that if you're ending, one of the examples we use is if there's a municipal boundary and this town calls this area a designated growth area and this town calls their side a conservation area, neither of those things is going to thrive. The economy and the environment do not stop at the boundary line. So the more we can encourage regional cooperation, either in a shared plan or making sure that the plans are coordinated, the better impact we're going to have moving forward.
On that LD, I think it's 429, the historic preservation tax credit, doesn't that contain a couple of other elements, including an increase in the credit in rural areas?
That's a separate bill that's brought forward. There was one bill that makes the large project credit easier to use. There's another bill that has an incentive specifically for rural areas. Those came outside of the Policy Action 2025. It's the bill that we talked about specifically that came through Policy Action 2023, died on the appropriations table, and then is moving forward and now on the appropriations table.
Somebody told me yesterday that the bill that increases the tax credit in rural areas did get out of committee, ought to pass.
Yes. In my notes, I can tell you it had lower, hold on a sec. So that was LD 1755 rural, ought to pass is 9, ought not to pass is 4. LD 146 is big projects. That had ought to pass of 8 and ought not to pass of 7. The bill that we focused on had ought to pass at 10 with 2 opposed.
That bill that the first one you mentioned then is the 10%er, right? It came out with a modest bias toward ought to pass. And just as someone who works with developers, I'd say that's a pretty significant bill, especially for rural areas where a lot of these folks are.
So, and my understanding is the challenge was if we have a rural bonus historic rehab tax credit, how does that impact the affordable housing tax credit? And are we going to lose affordable housing units as a result? The 3 bills together, it's complicated. Tara Kelly with Maine Preservation was deeply involved in monitoring all of that process, and those are my recollections of what we're dealing with it.
I think if you're affordable, you're also left in, so I could be wrong. But I do know the rural piece is significant.
So we'll have links to all of the bills that are in policy action. If you've got other information, I'm happy to help you move forward with it. All of the historic rehab tax credits will have fiscal notes of between $150,000 and $200,000 a year, ongoing in a time when, if you're reading the newspapers, you know the budget is extremely tough. We're hearing there may not be an appropriations table. It's going to be highly competitive. So there's still lots of work to do if there is a particular bill that you're interested in supporting.
Thank you, Nancy and team. And Sarah's going to go announce the winner of the drawing.